This night my goose quill whispers against parchment, and I, Agnes of Millbrook, follow its scratches across this weathered page. Feel the weight of rough hemp paper beneath trembling fingers, the cold seeping through stone walls where a single tallow candle flickers like hope itself. If these words touch your heart, join us again, and whisper from where you listen to me. Now, lie down, breathe the scent of dying embers. Let us write together through a world of longing and shadows. My dearest Thomas, my boy of 14 summers now grown beyond my reach, I take quill to parchment this December eve in the year of our Lord 1348. The monastery bells have long since ceased their evening prayers, and our village of Millbrook rests beneath winter's heavy blanket. My fingers, cracked from harvest work and washing, grip this borrowed quill. Brother Francis was kind enough to spare it when I confessed my desperate need to send words across the miles that separate us. The candlelight dances across these words, casting shadows that remind me of your face when you were small, how darkness would play across your features as you slept beside the hearth. Do you remember, Thomas, how we would sit by firelight while I mended your torn breeches? Your father's breeches, too large for your growing frame, patched with scraps of wool from sheep that no longer graze our fields. The fabric holds memories, summer afternoons when you chased those same sheep across meadows now brown with winter's touch. I pause between words, listening to the wind outside our cottage. It howls through gaps in the thatch that your father promised to mend before the sickness came. The sound reminds me of wolves, though no wolves have been seen near Millbrook for 3 generations. Still, something wild prowls beyond our doors now, something that steals breath from the living and leaves behind empty homes with doors that creak open in the night breeze. My hand trembles not from cold alone, though December's fingers reach through every crack in our walls. This trembling comes from something deeper, the fear that these words may never reach you, that the roads between here and York have become passages for more than travelers and merchants. Brother Francis speaks in hushed tones of villages where no smoke rises from chimneys, where church bells ring with no one to hear them. Yet I write because mothers must hope, and hope requires faith that words can bridge any distance. The parchment feels coarse beneath my palm, so different from the smooth linens I once washed for Lord Edmund's manor. Before you left, I would sometimes steal moments to run my fingers across the finest fabrics, wondering at their softness. Now, this rough surface seems more honest, a texture that matches the harshness of days since you departed for your apprenticeship. The merchant who promised to teach you his trade, Master Geoffrey, seemed kind enough when he came to our door last spring. His clothes spoke of prosperity, his manner of gentleness toward village folk. I pray each night that he treats you as his own son, that you find warmth in his household as winter deepens. Do you still wake before dawn as I taught you? Here in Millbrook, I rise when the rooster's crow mingles with the sound of Brother Francis ringing prime. The abbey sits just beyond our wheat fields, or what were once our wheat fields. This year's harvest was poor, Thomas. The rains came too early, then not at all when the grain needed summer's gentle kiss. Many families have less stored for winter than in years past, and with so many men taken by the sickness, fewer hands worked the land. I light this candle each evening, and imagined you in Master Geoffrey's workshop, learning the mysteries of his trade. Are you warm enough? Do you have sufficient food? These questions circle my mind like carrion birds, never settling, never finding answers. The not knowing weighs heavier than any burden I've carried, heavier than water buckets from the well, heavier than sacks of grain, heavier than the grief that settled on our village like morning fog that never lifts. The flame beside me sputters, sending shadows dancing across the cottage walls. These walls have stood for 30 years, built by your grandfather's hands when he first claimed this plot of land from Lord Edmund's generosity. The flame came from the creek bed where you learned to catch minnows, small silver lives that slipped between your fingers like time itself. Now that creek runs lower than in years past, and fewer children play along its banks. The laughter that once echoed from cottage to cottage has grown thin, replaced by whispered prayers and the sound of doors closing too early in the evening. I wonder if you remember the taste of honey cakes I made for harvest festivals, when our cottage filled with neighbors and their children. Sweet William would play his pipe, and dancing would spill from our hearth into the yard, under stars that seemed closer then, more willing to bless earthly celebrations. Those recipes remain, written in my memory rather than on parchment, waiting for hands to mix flour and honey, waiting for occasions that call for sweetness, rather than the bitter herbs I now brew for those who come to my door seeking remedies for what cannot be cured. My son, my Thomas, as I write these words by flickering flame, I feel your presence as surely as if you sat beside me on the three-legged stool your father carved. The wood bears the marks of his chisel, imperfect but made with love, like everything in our simple home. Perhaps love is what travels fastest along roads and rivers, reaching destinations before feet or hooves or cartwheels. Perhaps these words carry something beyond ink and parchment, something that distance cannot diminish. The candle burns lower, but I am not ready to surrender this night to darkness. There is too much to tell you, too many days of silence to fill with words. Outside, frost forms patterns on our single window, delicate tracery that will vanish with morning sun, but exists now in perfect, temporary beauty. Like moments, Thomas, like the memory of your last embrace before you walked down the path toward the main road, your bundle of belongings smaller than my hope, but larger than my ability to keep you safe within these walls. The scent of dried hay still clings to my apron, Thomas, though winter has locked our barn for months. This morning, when I moved through the empty stalls where our cow Bessie once lived, that golden sweetness rose like summer ghosts around me. Do you remember how hay smells when it's perfect? Not green like growing grass, not brown like autumn death, but that in-between color that holds all of summer's promises. I breathed deeply and saw you again at 7 years old, diving into the tallest haystack, emerging with straw in your hair and joy painting your face brighter than any illuminated manuscript. Your laughter then could chase away any shadow. Even now, as December wind rattles our shutters, I hear echoes of that sound bouncing off the barn walls where you built your kingdoms of hay bales. You were always a builder, Thomas, always arranging things into new shapes, new possibilities. Your hands, so much like your father's, long-fingered and gentle despite their strength, would pat and shape until each bale sat exactly where your young architect's mind demanded. I fold clothes by candlelight now, clothes grown too large without your growing body to fill them. Your winter tunic hangs on its peg like a scarecrow, arms empty of the embraces I miss more than bread, more than warmth, more than the sound of bells calling faithful to prayer. The wool still holds your scent, faint but present, that particular mixture of boy sweat and innocence that no amount of washing could entirely erase. I confess, Thomas, I sometimes hold that tunic to my face and pretend you're still small enough to curl against my chest during thunderstorms. Brother Francis brought news yesterday that the sickness has reached York. My heart stopped beating for 3 full seconds. I counted them like tolling bells before resuming its rhythm with painful intensity. York, where you apprentice, where you learn to be a man in a world I cannot see or control. The brother's face carried the weight of unspoken details, the kind of weight that bends even strong shoulders. He speaks of God's will and divine mercy, but his eyes hold questions that have no comfortable answers. The hay-scent memory pulls me back to last summer's harvest, when you were still here to help gather the cutting. Your arms, growing longer each month, could reach stalks I could not. Together we worked in comfortable silence, punctuated by your occasional questions. Why do some people sicken and die while others remain healthy? Why does Lord Edmund have 3 horses when we have none? Why did God make mosquitoes? Questions that deserve better answers than a mother's wisdom can provide. That harvest feels like a different world now. The fields around Millbrook lie fallow under snow, but beneath that white blanket, I know the earth holds memories of our footsteps, yours and mine, walking between rows of golden grain that stretched toward horizons we took for granted. We moved through those fields like figures in a tapestry, small against the vastness of sky and land, but significant in ways we didn't yet understand. Every step we took together was precious, though we couldn't know it then. I saved seeds from our best plants, Thomas, storing them in clay jars sealed with beeswax. Come spring, God willing, I'll plant them in the garden plot where you helped me grow turnips and carrots. Your small hands were clumsy at first with the delicate work of placing seeds at proper intervals, but patience taught you precision. By summer's end, you could plant a straighter row than many grown men. These skills, this knowledge of soil and season, flows through our family like an underground river. Your grandfather taught your father taught me, and I passed what I could to you before circumstances pulled you toward different learning. The master who took you for apprenticing, Master Geoffrey, deals in cloth and threads, in the mysteries of dye and weaving that turn sheep's wool into garments fit for merchants and their wives. His trade requires different skills than farming, skills of calculation and negotiation, of understanding markets that stretch beyond our village boundaries. Yet, I hope he appreciates the foundation you carry, the understanding of seasons and growth, and the patient work of tending things until they flourish. In my dreams, I see you bent over account books instead of hay bales, your fingers stained with ink instead of dirt. The image both thrills and saddens me. Thrills because it represents possibilities beyond anything our family has known. Saddens because those ink-stained fingers will never again help me stack hay in our barn, never again build kingdoms from summer's golden treasure. You are becoming someone new, Thomas, someone I can only imagine. The boy who delved into haystacks is transforming into a man who might one day own warehouses full of valuable goods. But tonight, by candlelight, you are still my hay-diving boy. I close my eyes and summon that summer afternoon when thunderclouds gathered and we raced to bring the last hay under shelter before rain could ruin our work. We moved with desperate efficiency, you and I, loading the cart with armfuls of sweet-smelling stalks. When the first raindrops began to fall, we were safe in the barn, surrounded by our rescued harvest, laughing at our narrow victory over the weather. The rain drummed on the roof like dozens of small fingers, and you asked me to tell you stories of my childhood while we waited for the storm to pass. I spoke of my mother's hands braiding my hair, of learning to churn butter until my arms ached, of the first time I saw your father across the churchyard and felt my heart skip like a stone on water. You listened with the intensity children bring to tales of the mysterious time before their existence, when their parents were young and the world held different shapes. That barn, filled with new hay and the sound of rain, became our private world for those storm-held hours. We shared bread and cheese while thunder rolled overhead, and you asked if we could sleep there that night, surrounded by summer's treasure. I almost said yes, Thomas. I wanted to grant you that adventure, to let you dream in the sweetness of hay scent and rain sounds. But practical matters called us back to the cottage. Evening chores, supper preparations, the dozen small tasks that fill a mother's hours. Now, alone with winter wind for company, I wish I had been less practical, more willing to embrace magic moments when they offered themselves. I would trade a dozen properly prepared suppers for one more night listening to your breathing slow into sleep while hay scent wrapped around us like a blessing. The memory of that almost adventure burns brighter than the candle beside me, more warming than the embers in our hearth. The bronze bells of St. Bartholomew's call across our village as I write, their evening song carrying winter air through gaps in our shutters. Each toll echoes in my chest like a heartbeat made audible, like the rhythm of your name repeated in prayer. Thomas, Thomas, Thomas. 3 syllables that pulse through every Compline bell, every Vespers chime, every dawn lauds that marks another day of distance between us. Do you hear bells where you are? Do they speak your mother's love in their ancient bronze voices? Brother Francis rings those bells with hands gentler than their powerful sound suggests. I've watched him from our garden, his brown robes moving like shadows against the bell tower's stone. His movements hold the precision of ritual, each pull of the rope timed to create the sacred intervals our village has depended upon for 60 years. When your grandfather was young, those same bells called villagers to witness his marriage to your grandmother. When your father was born, they celebrated new life. When he died, they mourned his passing into God's embrace. The sound travels differently in winter air, Thomas, crisper, cleaner, carrying farther than summer's thick atmosphere allows. Tonight's bells seem to reach beyond Millbrook's boundaries, beyond the frozen fields and sleeping forests, perhaps all the way to York, where you learn your new trade. I imagine them arriving at Master Geoffrey's workshop as you close ledger books and set aside measuring tools, a reminder of home carried on December wind like a letter written in sound. When you were small, you would count the bells with me, 1, 2, 3, your small voice matching each bronze declaration until you lost interest somewhere around 7 or 8 tolls and wandered toward more immediate fascinations. Your attention span for counting lasted exactly as long as most children's, brief but intense while it held. Now I count alone, and the numbers stretch longer, carrying weight they never held when shared with your eager participation. The bell tower has stood since before my grandmother's time, built when villagers could afford dressed stone and skilled masons. Its construction required cooperation from every household in Millbrook, some contributing labor, others materials, still others coins saved from market sales. When you were small, you would count the bells with me, 1, 2, 3, your small voice matching each bronze declaration until you lost interest somewhere around 7 or 8 tolls and wandered toward more immediate fascinations. Your attention span for counting lasted exactly as long as most children's, brief but intense while it held. Now I count alone, and the numbers stretch longer, carrying weight they never held when shared with your eager participation. The bell tower has stood since before my grandmother's time, built when villagers could afford dressed stone and skilled masons.
Its construction required cooperation from every household in Millbrook, some contributing labor, others materials, still others coins saved from market sales.
Your great-grandfather helped quarry the foundation stones from the hills beyond our wheat fields. His name, along with other contributors, is carved into the tower's base, where weather and time have softened but not erased their memory. I remember teaching you to read those carved names when you were 9 years old, your finger tracing letters worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. William Baker, you read slowly, sounding out each syllable. Thomas Fletcher. You looked up at me with surprise, discovering you shared a name with a man dead 30 years. That makes you important, I told you, and your chest swelled with the pride of connection to something larger than yourself. Do you remember feeling important, Thomas? Do you still? The bell's evening call draws our village together in ways we don't often acknowledge. In cottages scattered across Millbrook, people pause in their activities when bronze voices fill the air. Martha Weaver stops her spinning, John Cooper sets down his hammer, young Sarah Miller pauses in feeding chickens. All of us united for those few minutes in the shared experience of listening. We are alone in our separate dwellings, yet connected by sound that touches each hearth, each heart, with the same metallic song. Since the sickness came, fewer people respond to the bell's morning call to Mass. The church that once overflowed on feast days now echoes with empty spaces where familiar faces used to gather. Father Benedict continues his rituals with diminished congregation, his voice carrying farther in the less crowded nave. The bells still ring with the same faithful precision, but they call to changed circumstances, to a village learning to exist with absence rather than abundance. I think of Master Geoffrey's household and wonder what bells ring in York's numerous churches.
Do they sound different than ours? Larger, perhaps, with deeper voices befitting a city's greater importance? Or do all bells, regardless of size, speak the same essential language, the language of time marked and sacred moments announced? I hope you find comfort in whatever bells surround you. Hope they remind you of home without making you unbearably homesick. The bronze song carries memories tonight, Thomas. Each toll brings back moments when we listened together. Your head against my shoulder during Sunday Mass, your small body warm beside mine in the pew your grandfather carved from local oak. You would fidget during Father Benedict's longer sermons, but you remained still during the bell's calling, as if their sound held your attention in ways words could not. Perhaps music speaks to something deeper than understanding, something that bypasses the mind's need to interpret and goes straight to the soul's recognition. Winter evenings stretch long without your presence to mark their passing. I measure time now by bells rather than by your activities, not by Thomas needs supper or Thomas should banking the fire, but by prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. The church's rhythm has become my rhythm, monastic hours replacing maternal ones. It's a lonelier way to live, but it provides structure when structure feels necessary for survival. The cold metal of those bells contrasts sharply with the warmth they create in human hearts. Strange how something so hard and unforgiving can produce sounds that feel like embraces, like whispered reassurances that time continues and we are not forgotten by forces larger than ourselves. Brother Francis has told me that bells are blessed before installation, that holy water and prayers consecrate their bronze voices for God's service. Whether divine blessing or human need creates their power to comfort, I cannot say. I only know they comfort. As tonight's bells fade into winter silence, I hold their echoes in memory like coins saved against lean times.
Each remembered toll becomes a bridge between this moment and the next time I'll hear them ring. Between this letter I write and the day you'll return to hear them with me again. The bronze voices promise continuity, promise that some things endure despite change, despite separation, despite the shadows that have fallen across our world. The candle beside me flickers in sympathy with the bell's rhythm, light and sound creating harmony across different senses. Tomorrow the bells will ring again, and I will pause in whatever task occupies my hands to listen, to remember, to send love on bronze wings toward York, where you grow into manhood beyond my sight, but never beyond my mother's reaching heart. Where you once played, Thomas, now only winter wind tells stories to empty spaces. Our meadow lies beneath snow, but I can trace the paths your feet wore between favorite climbing trees and the creek where minnows taught you patience. This morning, walking to the well, I passed the oak where you built your first treehouse, if 3 boards balanced between branches can be called a house. The boards remain, weathered gray now, holding snow like shelves for winter's accumulation. No boy's laughter shakes their foundations anymore. The village green, where you joined other children in games whose rules changed with each season, stretches white and unmarked, save for occasional tracks of foxes or rabbits seeking whatever sustenance winter provides. I remember standing at our door, watching you run with William Cooper's son and little Mary Baker, your voices rising and falling like music made of pure joy. What song did children's play make? Something too beautiful for adult ears to properly hear, something we only recognize in retrospect when silence replaces it. Young William and Mary no longer run anywhere, Thomas.
The sickness took them both before autumn's end, their small bodies overcome by fevering that no mother's herbs could cool. William's mother, Eleanor, has not spoken since we laid him in the churchyard beside his father. She moves through her daily tasks like a woman walking in sleep, her eyes holding the particular emptiness that comes when hope dies before its time. Mary's parents fled Millbrook after her burial, leaving their cottage to stand empty, its door slowly forgetting the sound of a child's eager entrance. I walk past these empty spaces each day, my footsteps the only immediate sound in places that once echoed with community. The Baker cottage sits with shutters closed against more than weather. Inside, dust settles on the table where Mary's family shared meals, on the bed where her mother sang lullabies, on the hearth where her father told stories of brave knights and magical kingdoms. Abandonment creates its own kind of death, slower than sickness, but equally final. The fields beyond our village boundaries hold different emptiness. Plowed land lies unplanted, where men who might have worked it sleep beneath wooden crosses in expanding churchyard plots. Lord Edmund's steward came by twice this autumn, looking for tenant farmers to work vacant holdings. But few villagers possess the strength or heart for expanding their responsibilities when existing ones feel overwhelming. The land waits, patient as soil has always been, ready to produce abundance if human hands return to tend it. Your favorite fishing spot along Miller's Creek has grown wild with untrimmed willows. Last spring, you would sit there for hours with line and hook your father carved, more interested in watching water move than in actually catching anything edible.
The patience of fishing suited your contemplative nature. You could spend entire afternoons observing how light played across moving water, how different insects created circles where they touched the surface, how minnows moved like silver thoughts through green depths. I found myself there yesterday, drawn by memory to the flat rock where you used to sit. The creek runs lower now, partially frozen,
its summer song reduced to whispers beneath ice. I sat where you once sat, trying to see what you saw, trying to understand what fishing taught you about waiting, about hope, about the relationship between effort and reward. The rock felt cold through my woolen skirt, but I remained until sunset painted the sky colors you would have commented on with the particular way children notice beauty without self-consciousness. The path home from the creek passes the ruins of old Martin's mill, abandoned long before your birth, when the creek's flow proved insufficient for reliable grinding. You claimed those ruins as your castle, your fortress, your ship sailing toward adventures I could only imagine. The stones that once channeled water for practical purposes became, in your mind, walls protecting imaginary kingdoms or treasure chambers hiding fictional gold. Playing alone, you populated empty spaces with whatever companions your imagination required. Do you remember the stories you would tell me about your adventures in those ruins? How you battled dragons that looked suspiciously like blackberry brambles? How you discovered secret passages that adults couldn't see? How you appointed yourself king of territories measured in footsteps rather than acres? Your tales arrived at our supper table each evening like installments of epic poems, continuing chronicles of bravery and magic that transformed familiar landscape into realms worthy of legends. The ruins remain, Thomas, but winter has claimed them more completely than your imagination ever did.
Snow fills the spaces where mill wheels once turned, covering the evidence of human purpose with nature's patient reclamation. Ice decorates broken stone with crystal formations more beautiful than any castle decoration you invented. The ruins are becoming something new, not mill, not playground, but transitional space between what was and what will be. Walking among these empty places, I sometimes hear echoes of your voice calling across years rather than distance. Memory has its own acoustics, its own way of preserving sounds that ears no longer receive. I hear you laughing at some private joke, shouting discoveries that seemed earth-shaking in the moment, calling my name when adventure led you farther from home than comfortable independence allowed. These echo sounds comfort and wound simultaneously, like pressing on healing injuries to confirm they're still tender. The village feels larger without its children, Thomas. Spaces expand when not filled with young energy, when not measured by the distance a boy can run before needing rest. Cottages seem to sit farther apart without children carrying messages between households, without games that flowed from yard to yard, creating temporary bridges of shared purpose. Adults move through expanded distances with less frequent connection, each family becoming more isolated in the absence of young voices that once wove community together. Yet some playing places resist emptiness entirely. The church steps where you sat during Sunday services when summer heat made the nave uncomfortable still seem to hold your presence. Father Benedict tells me he sometimes pauses there, remembering how you would whisper questions about saints' stories or wonder aloud why angels needed wings if they could fly by divine power. Your curiosity blessed that space with something that outlasts your physical absence. The wind that moves through these empty places carries more than cold, Thomas. It carries the weight of missing, the sound of spaces learning to exist without purposes they were shaped to serve. But wind also carries seeds, promise of future growth, possibility that emptiness might be filled again with different but equally valuable life. I listen to winter wind with both mourning and hope, hearing endings and beginnings in the same cold song. The houses that stand silent now hold secrets I prefer to whisper rather than speak aloud, Thomas. Yet mothers cannot protect their children from truth by avoiding it, even when those children live beyond the reach of a mother's sheltering arms. The sickness came to Millbrook as sickness comes everywhere, quietly at first, disguised as common ailments that might be cured with familiar remedies, then revealing its true nature too late for any healing save God's mercy. Eleanor Carpenter's cottage sits 3 houses down from ours, its chimney cold for 2 months now. Through her window I can see her table still set for 4. Eleanor, her husband James, young Peter, and baby Anne. The wooden bowls remain in their places like soldiers maintaining formation after the battle has ended. Nobody has heart enough to clear that table, to admit that 4 bowls will never again hold Eleanor's thick barley soup or James's favorite cheese. Some acknowledgments hurt more than the pain they're meant to resolve. I helped Eleanor in those final weeks when her family weakened too quickly for any one person to tend them all. The sickness brought fever that made strong men delirious as children, that stole breath from healthy lungs and replaced it with rattling coughs that echoed through cottage walls. Eleanor moved between beds like a battlefield angel, carrying cool water and warm blankets and prayers whispered in the particular tone mothers use when they're asking God to listen more carefully than usual.
James died first, his blacksmith's strength no match for the weakness that crept through his massive frame like rust claiming iron. He who could shape metal with bare hands could not grip a cup of water in his final days. Eleanor held his head while he struggled for breath, her own voice steady with the forced calm that mothers perfect when circumstances demand strength beyond human capacity. His last words were instructions about the anvil in his shop, practical concerns of a working man who couldn't accept that work was finished. Young Peter lasted 3 days longer than his father, his 12-year-old body fighting with the fierce stubbornness of youth that refuses to accept defeat. He called for you, Thomas, in his delirium, asking when you would return from York, insisting that you had promised to teach him to fish at Miller's Creek. Eleanor and I took turns sitting beside his bed, pretending his promises weren't impossible to keep. Pretending that boys who fever until they barely recognize their own mothers might still recover to fulfill plans made in health. Baby Anne went most peacefully, perhaps because she was too young to understand what was being taken from her. She simply stopped waking one morning, her small chest no longer rising and falling beneath the blanket I had helped Eleanor stitch when Anne was born. Such a tiny burden to carry to the churchyard, yet heavy enough to break Eleanor's back as she walked behind Father Benedict toward ground that was receiving too many small bodies that autumn. Eleanor held on for a week after Anne's burial, her body apparently waiting until all her children were safely buried before allowing itself to surrender. I found her on Thursday morning when she failed to appear at the well for water.
She lay in her bed as if sleeping, her face peaceful for the first time in months, her hands folded over the letter she had tried to write to her sister in the next village, a letter that ended mid-sentence, pen dropped from fingers too weak to form final words. The Cooper family lost 3 of their 5 children, William, whom you played with every summer day, along with his younger sisters Martha and Grace. John Cooper, the village carpenter, spent his days building small coffins instead of the cabinets and chairs that had been his specialty. His hands, which once shaped wood into beautiful, useful things, learned to measure heartbreak in board feet and nail pounds. By winter's arrival, he had crafted more coffins than furniture, his workshop becoming a place of endings rather than beginnings.
I helped wash bodies for burial more times than I want to count, Thomas. These are not details a mother wishes to share with her son, but they are part of the truth you should know about what happened while you were safely away in York. The sickness changed people before it took them, fever bringing strange dreams that made familiar faces unrecognizable, weakness transforming strong bodies into fragile shells that seemed too small to have contained such vibrant life. Margaret Miller, who used to grind our grain and whose laughter could be heard across the village green, spent her final days speaking to people who had died years before. She held conversations with her deceased husband as if he sat beside her bed, discussed plans for spring planting with her father who had been buried a decade past. Perhaps dying allows us to see across veils that living eyes cannot penetrate, or perhaps fever creates visions that comfort those leaving familiar world for unknown territory. The strange mercy in all this sorrow was how quickly it passed through our village, Thomas.
Like a terrible storm that destroys much but moves on, the sickness spent its fury and departed, leaving survivors to count losses and begin the slow work of continuing. By November, no new cases appeared. By December, those of us who remained could walk through Millbrook without expecting to find fresh grief waiting behind familiar doors. Yet the silence that followed felt almost worse than the active crisis. During the sickness, we had purpose, people to tend, prayers to offer, practical tasks of caring that kept hands busy even when hearts broke. After the sickness passed, we faced the harder challenge of living normally in circumstances that had become anything but normal. How do you resume ordinary life when so many ordinary lives have ended? The village feels hollow now, Thomas, like a bell with its clapper removed. We go through familiar motions, drawing water from the well, tending animals, preparing meals, but the sound of community has changed. Fewer voices call across the green, fewer children race between cottages, fewer families gather for celebrations that mark passing seasons. We have learned to live with absence the way people learn to walk after losing a limb, possible but forever altered by what is missing. Brother Francis says the sickness tested our faith and found it strong enough to survive. He points to those who remained, to acts of kindness that multiplied even as opportunities for kindness diminished, to prayers that grew more sincere when circumstances made prayer feel like the only reliable refuge. Perhaps he is right. Perhaps crisis reveals strength we didn't know we possessed, faith we hadn't needed to examine in easier times. But tonight, as I write by candlelight in a cottage that should be filled with more life than mine alone, I think about secrets that empty houses keep. They hold the echo of final conversations, the weight of unfinished plans, the sadness of meals prepared for people who would never arrive to eat them.
These are heavy secrets for houses to carry, heavy truths for survivors to witness. I need bread dough this morning with hands that remember your smaller ones beside them, Thomas, your fingers eager to help but often hindering more than aiding in your enthusiasm to participate. The rhythm of kneading, push, fold, turn, push again, creates its own meditation, its own prayer spoken through flour-dusted palms and the ancient work of transforming grain into sustenance. Do you remember how the dough felt beneath your hands? Warm and yielding, responsive to pressure yet resilient enough to spring back, teaching patience through repetition. Your hands were always too eager, pressing too hard, working too quickly, wanting to rush through the slow transformation that bread requires. Gently, Thomas, I would tell you, placing my hands over yours to guide the proper motion. Bread teaches us that good things cannot be hurried.
You would slow your movements for a few minutes, then forget and return to your vigorous approach, scattering flour across our work table like snow across fields, creating more mess than progress, but bringing such joy to the task that I couldn't scold you properly. The bread we make today feeds only my mouth, but I still prepare enough for two, habit stronger than reason. The extra loaf sits on our shelf, growing stale, waiting for someone who will not come. I cannot seem to adjust measurements that my hands know by memory. 3 cups flour, 1 cup water, salt, yeast that bubbles and froths like tiny life awakening. These proportions feel sacred, unchanged since my mother taught them to me, since her mother taught them to her, reaching back through generations of women who fed their families with knowledge passed from hand to hand. When the dough rises in its bowl beside our hearth, covered with the linen cloth your grandmother wove, I see your face in its swelling surface.
Not your face as it appears now, 14 years old and growing toward manhood, but your face at 7, at 8, at 9, watching with fascination as yeast worked its mysterious transformation. Why does it grow bigger, you asked, and I tried to explain about tiny creatures too small to see, about warmth encouraging growth, about how some magic requires patience and cannot be rushed. The smell of baking bread fills our cottage differently now, Thomas. Without your eager anticipation to give it meaning, the aroma feels almost accusatory, reminding me of abundance in the midst of too much solitude. Bread is meant to be shared, meant to bring people together around tables where conversation flows as freely as butter melting on warm crusts. Eating alone transforms even the finest bread into mere fuel rather than communion, substance rather than sacrament. I remember the morning you insisted on making bread entirely by yourself, determined to prove your mastery of skills observed but not yet owned. You measured ingredients with exaggerated care, your small tongue poking from the corner of your mouth in concentration. The proportions were wrong, too much water, too little flour, and the dough became sticky chaos that clung to everything it touched. Rather than admit defeat, you added more flour, then more water when that made it too stiff, creating a cycle that ended with half our supplies scattered across table, floor, and yourself. Instead of scolding, I helped you clean up, then started fresh, letting you begin again with proper guidance. Mistakes are part of learning, I told you, words my own mother had spoken to me when I first attempted bread making and produced loaves heavy enough to use as weapons. The second attempt succeeded beautifully, and your pride in pulling golden loaves from our oven was worth every grain of wasted flour from the first disaster. Success tastes sweeter when failure has seasoned the effort. The bread knife that cuts today's loaf is the same one your father carved from hornbeam wood, its handle worn smooth by years of daily use. His hands shaped it to fit perfectly in my palm, understanding through love how tools should accommodate the person who will use them most often. Every slice I cut carries the memory of his craftsmanship, his understanding that even simple implements deserve attention to detail, deserve to be made with care that outlasts their maker. The crumb of today's bread is fine and even, the crust golden brown from our stone oven's steady heat. Your father built that oven himself, laying stones with the precision he brought to all his work, calculating the proper size for our family's needs. He could not have known that someday I would use it to bake bread for 1 instead of 3, that his careful measurements would accommodate loneliness rather than abundance. The oven holds heat beautifully, his engineering sound even when circumstances have changed beyond his imagining. I spread honey on warm bread and taste summer in its sweetness, remembering how you would help me tend our bee skeps in the garden behind the cottage,
You were fearless around the bees, Thomas, approaching their homes with the calm confidence that children possess before the world teaches them to fear. The bees seemed to recognize your innocence, rarely stinging despite your proximity to their treasure. They know you mean no harm, I would tell you, watching as you observed their ceaseless work with the fascination that marked all your encounters with creatures who lived by instincts rather than reasoning. The honey jar sits half empty now, its contents lasting longer than expected when shared with no one. Honey never spoils, Brother Francis has told me, something about its sweetness preserving itself against time's corruption. Perhaps sweetness possesses its own protective magic, its own ability to endure when other things fail.
If so, the sweetness of memories might last equally long, preserved by love's particular chemistry against the spoilage that threatens all precious things. When I clean flour from our work table, I find traces of your handprints still visible in wood grain, where enthusiastic kneading left permanent impressions. Your father's table bore those marks as badges of honor, evidence that his family used his craftsmanship for its intended purpose. I trace those small handprints with my finger, measuring how much your hands have grown since leaving these fossilized memories of your younger self. In York, your hands learn different skills now, skills that will never leave traces in our cottage wood. The warmth of fresh bread cannot fill the cold spaces where your chatter used to accompany my baking, Thomas. You would tell me elaborate stories while I worked, tales of knights and dragons that seemed perfectly reasonable in the context of flour-dusted mornings and rising dough. Your imagination transformed our simple kitchen into a setting for epic adventures, your voice providing the soundtrack for ordinary tasks, elevated by a child's participation into something approaching magic. Do you still tell stories, Thomas? Does Master Geoffrey appreciate the way your mind creates connections between unrelated things, finding narrative threads that bind separate experiences into coherent tales? I hope your apprenticeship includes time for imagination alongside practical learning, space for the storytelling gift that has always been part of your particular way of seeing the world. A man who cannot tell stories, who cannot find meaning in the connections between things, may master a trade, but miss the deeper purposes that make trades worth mastering. The butter I spread on today's bread comes from cream skimmed yesterday from milk provided by our neighbor's cow, since we lost Bessie to the same sickness that took so many of our friends.
Sharing resources has become necessity rather than choice. Neighbors depending on neighbors in ways that would have seemed unusual before circumstances taught us about interdependence. Mrs. Davies provides milk in exchange for bread, vegetables from my garden, help with tasks too difficult for her aging hands to manage alone. This exchange creates its own sweetness, Thomas, the sweetness of community surviving crisis, of people caring for each other when caring becomes essential rather than optional. Perhaps crisis teaches lessons that prosperity cannot, reveals strengths that comfortable times leave dormant. If so, then even our sorrows serve purposes beyond our understanding. Even our losses contribute to growth we couldn't achieve through easier means. As I write these words with one hand while holding warm bread in the other, I imagine you in Master Geoffrey's house, perhaps eating finer bread than our cottage produces. Bread made from wheat ground finer than our village mill could manage, seasoned with spices that never reach Millbrook's markets. I hope that bread nourishes your growing body and your expanding mind. Hope it provides strength for learning and growth and becoming the man you're meant to be. But I also hope you remember the taste of bread made by your mother's hands, kneaded with flour that carries the story of our village's wheat fields, baked in the oven your father built with stones he selected personally from Miller's Creek. Some nourishment cannot be purchased, Thomas. Some flavors can only be created by love, mixed with simple ingredients, seasoned with the irreplaceable spice of home.
The wooden prayer beads that belonged to your grandmother rest beside me as I write, Thomas. Their familiar weight worn smooth by decades of faithful fingers counting Aves and Paternosters through seasons of joy and sorrow alike. Tonight I pray for the living, for the dead, for you who exist somewhere between my daily life and my hopes for tomorrow.
Each bead carries the texture of petition whispered in darkness, when only God's ears seem willing to listen to a mother's fears, a mother's gratitude, a mother's desperate love cast toward horizons she cannot see. I pray first for those we have lost, Thomas, neighbor families whose empty cottages remind us daily that death comes for young and old, strong and weak, without regard for our human sense of fairness. Father Benedict tells us that the souls of the departed rest in God's mercy, that their suffering has ended while ours continues, that we should find comfort in their peace rather than sorrow in our loss. His words carry truth, yet my heart struggles to release earthly attachments in favor of heavenly understanding. Missing people is not easily resolved by theological explanations. Eleanor Carpenter appears in my prayers most evenings, her face as I last saw it, peaceful in death, but bearing traces of the struggle that preceded peace. I pray that she has found her children in whatever realm souls inhabit after flesh fails them, that James meets her with the gentle strength that marked their 20 years of marriage, that baby Anne recognizes the mother who sang lullabies over her cradle. Do families reconstitute themselves in eternity, Thomas? Does love survive the dissolution of the bodies that housed it? Young Peter Cooper visits my dreams, asking about your return from York with the insistence that fever gave his final days. In dreams I can answer him honestly, can promise that you will come home for spring planting, that you will teach him to fish at Miller's Creek as you promised, that some plans survive despite the obstacles that reality presents. Dream logic allows impossibilities that waking hours reject, creating space where love exists without limitation, where time moves backward to retrieve what has been lost. I pray for you with different words each night, Thomas, seeking fresh language for concerns that remain constant. Your safety in York, where strangers determine your daily life, your health in a city where sickness might spread more quickly through crowded streets than through our scattered village. Your happiness as you grow into manhood beyond your mother's influence. These prayers feel like letters written to God, messages sent toward heaven with the same uncertain delivery that marks letters sent toward distant cities. Do you pray, Thomas? Does Master Geoffrey's household observe the canonical hours that structure our village days? Or do merchants follow different rhythms determined by market schedules rather than monastic bells? I hope you find time for conversation with God amid whatever busyness fills your apprentice hours. Prayer provides comfort that human companionship cannot duplicate, offers perspective that earthly concerns tend to obscure when they press too closely against consciousness. The chapel where your father and I were married still holds our wedding candles in its altar niche, their wax darkened by 22 years of occasional burning, but their flames still capable of illumination when festivals or special needs require light beyond ordinary requirements. I light those candles when I pray for you, Thomas, creating a visible symbol of invisible hopes, transforming ordinary petition into ceremony that engages more senses than words alone can reach. Brother Francis has taught me to pray for enemies as well as friends, following Christ's difficult commandment to love those who cause us harm. This instruction challenges more than it comforts, requiring forgiveness for circumstances that seem to deserve anger rather than charity. Yet I attempt it, praying for whatever forces brought sickness to our village, seeking understanding rather than blame, grace rather than justice. Such prayers stretch my heart past its natural boundaries, demanding expansion that feels painful but necessary.
Brother Francis has taught me to pray for enemies as well as friends, following Christ's difficult commandment to love those who cause us harm. This instruction challenges more than it comforts, requiring forgiveness for circumstances that seem to deserve anger rather than charity. Yet I attempt it, praying for whatever forces brought sickness to our village, seeking understanding rather than blame, grace rather than justice. Such prayers stretch my heart past its natural boundaries, demanding expansion that feels painful but necessary.
I pray for our village's future, for strength to continue when continuing requires more effort than we expected to provide. Millbrook needs people willing to plant crops that others may harvest, to birth children who will grow up in a world we can only imagine, to maintain traditions that link us to the past while adapting to present realities. These prayers feel like investments in possibilities rather than petitions for immediate relief, faith expressed through long-term thinking rather than urgent requests. The rhythm of prayer beads creates its own meditation, Thomas, fingers moving from wooden sphere to wooden sphere while lips shape familiar words and mind wanders through concerns too large for single prayers to address. Your grandmother prayed these same beads through plagues and famines, through the deaths of 4 children before your father survived to adulthood, through sorrows that make my current struggles seem manageable by comparison. Her persistence teaches me that prayer is less about receiving answers than about maintaining connection with sources of strength beyond human provision. Sometimes my prayers become wordless, Thomas, merely the sound of breathing accompanied by candlelight and the weight of beads between fingers. In those moments, petition dissolves into presence. Asking transforms into simply being available for whatever communication God might offer in return. These wordless prayers feel most honest, least corrupted by my human tendency to instruct divinity about proper responses to situations that might serve purposes beyond my understanding. I pray for Master Jeffrey's family, for people I have never met who now influence your daily life more directly than your mother can. May they treat you with kindness, challenge you appropriately, guide your learning with patience that encourages growth rather than compliance alone. Your welfare depends on strangers' goodness, Thomas, a dependency that requires faith in human nature as much as faith in divine providence. Prayers for people we don't know challenge our capacity for trust in humanity's better angels. The church where these prayers rise toward heaven has heard similar petitions for 3 generations, its stones seasoned by the hopes and fears of villagers whose names are now carved on weathered markers in the churchyard. Father Benedict reminds us that we join our voices with this continuing chorus, that our individual prayers harmonize with centuries of faithful petition rising from the same location toward the same eternal listener. Prayer connects us not only with God, but with the community of all who have sought divine attention in times of need. Tonight's prayers include gratitude alongside petition, Thomas. Gratitude that you were safely away when sickness visited Millbrook, that your apprenticeship provided protection we didn't recognize as providential until circumstances revealed its value. Sometimes blessings disguise themselves as difficulties, requiring hindsight to reveal their true nature. Your departure felt like loss until it became salvation, your absence transforming from sorrow into thanksgiving that complicates a mother's emotions but clarifies God's mysterious care. Winter arrived early this year, Thomas, but my heart continues waiting for the spring that your return would bring to our cottage. The seasons pass differently when measured by a mother's longing rather than by calendar pages or feast day celebrations. December feels like it has lasted 3 months, each day stretching longer than natural light should allow.
each night holding more darkness than seems fair for creatures who depend on hope to survive the coldest season.
The oak tree outside our window has shed its final leaves, standing now like a skeleton against gray skies that promise snow but deliver only cold wind and the kind of dampness that seeps through wool and settles in bones. That tree witnessed your first steps in our yard, your first successful climb to its lowest branch, your first fall when overconfidence exceeded ability. Its branches held your childhood adventures, supported the rope swing your father hung from its strongest limb, provided shade for summer afternoons when you would lie beneath its canopy reading stories from the few books Brother Francis lent to families seeking knowledge beyond survival skills. Do you remember the treehouse we planned to build in those branches, Thomas? We gathered wood scraps throughout one summer, piling them beside the oak while discussing architecture that seemed reasonable to a boy's imagination, but challenged the laws of construction that experience teaches. Your father promised to help when hardest work slowed, but harvest led to winter preparation, winter to spring planting, spring to another harvest, and somehow the treehouse remained forever on tomorrow's list of possibilities. Now I look at those weathered boards still stacked beside the oak and wonder if some projects serve their purpose simply by being planned, by creating dreams that unite hearts around shared visions, even when circumstances prevent completion. The treehouse we never built may have been more valuable as idea than as structure, more meaningful as hope than as achievement. Sometimes anticipation provides richer satisfaction than fulfillment, possibility more sweetness than reality. The cold this winter bites deeper than previous years, Thomas, though whether that comes from weather or from loneliness, I cannot determine. Our cottage feels larger when heated by one person's presence rather than three, as if cold air expands to fill emotional space as well as physical volume.
I bank our fire each night with careful attention, knowing that morning will bring no one else's breath to warm the air, no one else's movement to stir life into rooms that settle into stillness when I sleep. Brother Francis brought word yesterday that York has received early snow. The trade along the northern roads has slowed as merchants wait for clearer weather to resume their journeys. This news pleases and troubles me simultaneously. Pleases because it suggests you are safe indoors, learning your trade, rather than traveling dangerous roads. Troubles because winter weather might prevent any message you send from reaching Millbrook before spring allows reliable communication to resume. Mothers' hearts want constant reassurance that distance and silence cannot provide. I imagine you in Master Jeffrey's workshop, learning to distinguish between different grades of wool, understanding how thread count affects fabric quality, mastering calculations that determine profit and loss in transactions I cannot fully comprehend. These skills will serve you better than the farming knowledge I could teach, will open opportunities that our village life could never provide. Yet part of me mourns the loss of simpler learning, how to read weather in cloud formations, how to judge soil readiness by its smell, how to coax maximum yield from small plots through attention and care. The winter tasks that fill my days feel purposeless without your future to justify present effort. I preserve vegetables in our root cellar, mend clothes that only I will wear, plan next year's garden as if planning itself provides sufficient reason for continuing. These activities maintain the rhythm of seasons, the patterns of preparation that connect present action with future need, but they lack the meaning that comes from serving someone whose welfare depends on your provision. Miss Davies stopped by this morning with fresh milk and stayed for conversation that warmed our kitchen more effectively than additional firewood could have managed. We spoke of spring planning, of seeds to order when merchants resume travel, of hopes that next year's growing season might prove more generous than this year's challenged harvest. Her presence reminded me that community survives individual loss, that shared concerns create connections that sustain us through seasons when personal motivation feels insufficient. The snow that began falling as she left continues tonight, transforming our familiar landscape into something magical but foreign. Snow covers the paths your feet wore between cottage and barn, cottage and well, cottage and the dozen destinations that comprised your childhood geography. Under winter's white blanket, Millbrook becomes anonymous, its particular character hidden beneath universal covering that makes all places look similar, all landmarks temporarily invisible. Yet snow also reveals things that green seasons conceal, Thomas. Animal tracks appear clearly against white background, showing us the night journeys of foxes and rabbits, the hunting patterns of owls, the daily routines of creatures who share our landscape but usually remain invisible to human observation. Snow teaches us that life continues even when we cannot see its evidence, that activity persists beneath surfaces that appear barren to casual inspection. I think of all the winters you will experience beyond my knowledge, Thomas. Winters in cities where snow means different challenges than it brings to villages, where heat comes from sources more reliable than wood-burning hearths, where food supplies depend on market systems rather than root cellars and preserved provisions. Your winters will be shaped by concerns I cannot imagine, comforted by conveniences I have never experienced, measured by accomplishments that extend beyond survival to prosperity. The quilt that covers my bed holds memories of warmer seasons when we worked together preparing for cold weather that seemed distant and theoretical. Your small fingers helped tie knots that secure batting between fabric layers, your careful stitches contributing to covering that now provides solitude rather than shared warmth. Each knot, each stitch carries the memory of your participation in creating comfort that outlasts the circumstances under which it was made. Do you sleep warmly in Master Geoffrey's house, Thomas? Do wool blankets or down-filled coverlets protect you from winter's bite? I hope your bed provides comfort that encourages dreams of home while supporting the rest that growing bodies and learning minds require. Sleep is healing, Brother Francis tells us, the body's way of repairing daily damage and preparing for tomorrow's challenges. May your sleep be peaceful, your dreams gentle, your rest sufficient for whatever demands your apprenticeship places on your young strength. The candle that lights my writing burns lower each evening, its flame steady despite drafts that find every gap in our cottage walls. Like that flame, hope burns steadily despite conditions that seem designed to extinguish it, fed by sources that do not depend on external circumstances for their fuel. Your mother's love provides that fuel, Thomas. Love that burns regardless of distance, regardless of silence, regardless of the cold winds that separate our separate winters. The neighbors who remain in Millbrook move like ghosts through familiar spaces, Thomas, their faces carrying the weight of too many farewells spoken to people who will never answer back. Mrs. Davies and I have become closer friends through shared loss than we ever were through shared prosperity, finding in each other's survival a kind of kinship that only those who have witnessed the same sorrows can fully understand.
We speak now with the careful honesty of people who have learned that time cannot be wasted on politeness when truth demands expression. Old Martha Weaver no longer sits at her spinning wheel by the window where passers-by once stopped to exchange news and gossip. Her cottage stands empty since the fever took her in November, her wheels silent, her half-finished projects abandoned at stages that will never know completion.
I walk past her door each morning and remember her voice calling greetings across the village green, her laughter punctuating conversations that wove community together as surely as her threads created cloth. Some silences echo louder than any sound, Thomas. The absence of Martha's daily spinning creates a gap in Millbrook's rhythm that extends beyond the practical loss of her stilled hands. She was our keeper of small stories, our chronicler of who had quarreled and who had reconciled, who was expecting babies and who was courting, who needed help and who could provide it. Without her gentle gossip flowing from cottage to cottage, we have lost track of each other's concerns, become strangers living in proximity rather than neighbors sharing connected lives. John Cooper, the carpenter who built more coffins than furniture this autumn, has begun drinking ale earlier each day and stopping later each night. His surviving children, 2 daughters who escaped the sickness that claimed their siblings, tend themselves while their father seeks numbness at the bottom of wooden cups. Grief affects different people differently, Thomas. Some find strength in crisis, while others discover that their foundations were less solid than they appeared during easier times. I pray for John's recovery from sorrow that threatens to destroy what disease spared. The Miller family cottage sits vacant since Margaret's death, its mill wheel frozen in winter ice that will eventually thaw, but may never again turn grain into flour for our village bread.
Without a miller, we depend on traveling merchants for ground grain, when merchants brave winter roads to reach us. This dependency makes us vulnerable in ways we never considered when Margaret's reliable presence guaranteed our daily bread. We learn too late what services we took for granted until they disappeared. Sarah Miller, who used to help her mother tend the mill and feed chickens with enthusiasm that made simple tasks look joyful, died 2 days before her mother, her young body succumbing to fever despite prayers that seemed to promise different outcomes. I helped wash Sarah's small form for burial, Thomas, and found my hands shaking as I remembered washing you at that same age. Your skin so warm and alive, your eyes bright with curiosity about everything surrounding you. The difference between living child and dead child is immeasurable, unbridgeable, unacceptable to hearts that expected different futures. Brother Francis moves among us like an anchor in stormy waters, his faith steady when ours wavers, his presence reassuring when earthly circumstances offer little comfort. Yet even he shows signs of strain, his brown robes hanging looser than last spring, his prayers carrying overtones of exhaustion alongside their familiar comfort. Shepherds suffer when their flocks diminish, Thomas. Even religious faith requires human community to sustain its earthly expressions. Loss affects everyone, including those whose calling is to help others bear loss gracefully. The evening gatherings that once brought families together for shared meals and conversation have ceased entirely, not from lack of desire, but from lack of families large enough to justify celebration. Mrs. Davies and I sometimes share supper, carrying our portions between cottages rather than eating alone in kitchens that echo with too much emptiness. Even simple companionship requires effort when sorrow weighs heavy on hearts that once lifted easily toward community joy.
Young William Baker's father, Robert, has taken to walking the boundaries of our village each evening, as if checking perimeters could protect us from further loss, or as if movement might ease the restlessness that comes from having no child to chase through cottage rooms. His wife Elizabeth rarely appears outdoors now, keeping to their cottage where William's clothes still hang on their pegs like faithful servants waiting for a master who will never return to claim them. Some grief turns inward, while other grief needs space to move through landscape seeking resolution that geography cannot provide. The seasonal celebrations that marked our community calendar have lost their meaning when community itself has been diminished beyond recognition. Christmas preparations feel hollow when so few remain to share Christmas joy, when empty places at tables outnumber occupied ones, when gift-giving reminds us more of who is missing than of who remains present. Brother Francis speaks of celebrating Christ's birth as hope for eternal life, but hearts struggling with temporal death find it difficult to embrace promises of spiritual continuity. I miss the particular way Martha used to hum while she worked, Thomas. Not songs with words, but melodic sounds that seemed to rise naturally from contentment, from hands busy with purposeful work, from a mind at peace with its place in the world's larger patterns. Her humming provided background music for our village days, unconscious accompaniment to ordinary activities that felt more precious when seasoned with her gentle voice. Now silence fills spaces where Martha's humming used to weave acoustic comfort into our daily routines. The children's voices that once carried between cottages, calling games and arguments and discoveries from yard to yard, have been replaced by adult conversations conducted in lower tones, discussions of practical matters rather than imaginative adventures.
Without children to leaven our seriousness with play, we adults have become heavier, more focused on survival than on joy, more aware of endings than of beginnings. Villages need children to remind adults of hope's possibility, Thomas. Without young voices, even the wisest adults forget how to expect good things from uncertain futures. Do you ever wonder about your childhood friends, Thomas? Do you remember William Cooper's infectious laughter, Mary Baker's bossy organizing of games, Peter Carpenter's loyalty that made him follow older children into adventures he was too young to understand fully? They remain young in my memory, frozen at ages when death interrupted their growing, preserved in moments of joy that feel both precious and painful to remember. Memory becomes complicated when it holds people who cannot make new memories, when past becomes the only tense available for certain relationships. The practical challenges of smaller population affect daily life in ways we didn't anticipate, Thomas. Tasks that required cooperation between families now must be accomplished alone or not at all. Heavy work that men shared while women tended other responsibilities now falls to whoever remains strong enough to attempt it, regardless of traditional divisions of labor. We are learning new forms of independence born from necessity rather than choice, developing skills that circumstances demand rather than inclination suggests. Yet among surviving neighbors, bonds have deepened through shared trials that revealed character more clearly than prosperous times ever did. Mrs. Davies proves more generous than I expected. John Cooper more fragile. Brother Francis more human. Crisis strips away pretense, shows us who people really are when comfort no longer masks their essential nature. Some revelations disappoint, while others inspire, but all teach us about the complexity of human hearts facing circumstances that test every assumption about strength and weakness.
The stars above Millbrook shine with the same ancient light they cast when you were small, Thomas, but they seem more distant now, as if winter's sky has stretched upward to accommodate the loneliness that fills earthbound spaces. I stand in our doorway each clear night, searching constellations that your father taught us to recognize during summer evenings when darkness came late and warmly, when star-watching felt like entertainment rather than desperate seeking for constancy in a world grown changeable and threatening. Do you see these same stars from York streets, Thomas? Do city lights dim their brilliance, or do they shine as clearly above merchant districts as above village cottages?
I imagine you pausing in whatever evening tasks occupy your time to glance upward, perhaps remembering lessons learned while lying on hay-sweet grass, your small hand pointing toward patterns your father's patient voice helped you trace across the night sky's vast manuscript of light. The Great Bear still wheels around the North Star with the same reliable rotation that guided shepherds and sailors long before our village existed, long before your great-grandfather cleared our land from forest that covered this valley when time was younger. Such constancy comforts when human affairs prove less dependable, when the patterns we thought permanent reveal themselves as temporary arrangements subject to change without warning. Stars teach patience and perspective, reminding earthbound watchers that some things endure beyond individual lifespans. Tonight I watched Venus rise above the eastern hills, that bright wanderer your father called the shepherd star, because its appearance signals dawn approaching for those who tend flocks through darkness. You always insisted on staying awake until Venus appeared, fighting sleep with the determined stubbornness that marked your childhood approach to any experience you deemed important. Tonight I watched Venus rise above the eastern hills, that bright wanderer your father called the shepherd star, because its appearance signals dawn approaching for those who tend flocks through darkness. You always insisted on staying awake until Venus appeared, fighting sleep with the determined stubbornness that marked your childhood approach to any experience you deemed important. Tonight I watched Venus rise above the eastern hills, that bright wanderer your father called the shepherd star, because its appearance signals dawn approaching for those who tend flocks through darkness. You always insisted on staying awake until Venus appeared, fighting sleep with the determined stubbornness that marked your childhood approach to any experience you deemed important.
"There it is, Mama!" you would shout, pointing toward the brightening sky as if you had personally summoned that celestial herald into visibility. The moon waxes toward full tonight, casting silver light across snow that transforms familiar landscape into something magical and strange. Moonlight reveals beauty in ordinary things, the graceful curve of our well's stone rim, the delicate tracery frost creates on cottage windows, the way shadows fall from fence posts like dark fingers reaching across luminous ground. Perhaps beauty requires proper illumination to become visible, Thomas. Perhaps we miss loveliness that surrounds us simply because we lack sufficient light to see clearly. I remember teaching you to navigate by stars during our evening walks to check animal snares your father set along creek boundaries. If you're ever lost, I told you, the North Star will guide you home. It never moves, never changes position, never abandons those who know how to find it. You absorbed this lesson with the seriousness children bring to information they sense might someday prove vital. Storing star knowledge alongside other survival skills adults pass to young ones through practical instruction rather than formal schooling. Can you still find the North Star from Master Geoffrey's courtyard, Thomas? Does it shine as faithfully above York as above Millbrook, offering the same steady guidance your father taught us to depend upon? I hope you remember those navigation lessons. Hope they serve you not just for physical direction, but as metaphor for finding your way through choices and challenges that require more than earthly wisdom to resolve successfully. The winter silence that settles over our village after sunset feels deeper than summer quiet, as if snow absorbs not only sound, but also the possibility of sound, creating a hush so complete it makes my own breathing seem intrusive.
In this profound stillness, stars appear brighter, more numerous, arranged in patterns that daylight conceals behind blue brilliance. Darkness reveals what light obscures, Thomas,
a paradox that applies to more than astronomy, I suspect. During the longest nights, when cold keeps most people indoors, and even dogs prefer hearthside sleeping to outdoor wandering, I sometimes imagine I can see all the way to York if I look carefully enough at the right angle. Rational thought rejects such possibility, but mother's love operates beyond rational limitations, reaching across impossible distances through emotional channels that ignore physical obstacles. Hearts see what eyes cannot, feel what hands cannot touch, know what minds cannot comprehend. Brother Francis speaks of how ancient peoples used stars to mark seasons, to know when to plant and when to harvest, when to expect spring's return and when to prepare for winter's challenges. Their calendar lived in the sky rather than on parchment pages, written in light that required no human scribe to record its passage. We have lost much of that star wisdom, Thomas, depending now on church bells and festival dates to organize our year, rather than reading time's passage directly from heaven's own chronometer. Yet I find comfort in connecting our small concerns with the vast patterns that have guided human life since Adam first looked upward and wondered at the lights that punctured darkness without being consumed by it. The same stars that watch over my solitary letter writing watched over Mary as she awaited Christ's birth, watched over shepherds who received angelic announcements, watched over wise men following celestial navigation toward divinity housed in human flesh. If stars can witness such momentous events and continue their faithful circling, perhaps they can also carry a mother's prayers toward a son learning manhood in distant places.
Perhaps light that travels such immense distances can bridge the smaller gap between Millbrook and York, carrying messages that earth-bound messengers might fail to deliver safely. Prayer and starlight both travel faster than horses, reach destinations that roads cannot access, illuminate darkness that candles cannot penetrate. The constellation your father called the Hunter rises above our eastern horizon now, Thomas, that bright pattern of stars that dominates winter sky with its unmistakable outline. Orion's belt still marks the Hunter's waist with 3 jewels arranged in perfect line, still points toward Sirius, burning like a blue-white coal in the southern sky. These stars formed their pattern long before human eyes learned to see hunters in their arrangement, will maintain their dance long after human civilization returns to dust. Such timeless perspective both humbles and encourages, Thomas. Humbles because it reveals how brief our individual concerns appear against eternity's vast backdrop. Encourages because it suggests that whatever forces arranged stars in patterns beautiful enough to inspire human imagination, whatever intelligence designed a universe where light and darkness create such complementary beauty, cares enough about details to make even small lives meaningful within larger purposes. I imagine you asleep now beneath these same stars, Thomas, your breathing steady with the deep rest that growing bodies require, your dreams perhaps carrying you back to Millbrook's familiar places, even while your waking hours learn York's different rhythms. Sleep well, my son. Let starlight bless your rest. Let moonbeams guard your slumber. Let the ancient patterns that have comforted countless mothers separated from countless children across countless nights watch over your peace until morning calls you to resume the important work of becoming the man you are meant to be.
Your place at our table remains set each evening, Thomas, your wooden spoon and clay bowl waiting in their familiar positions as if your absence were merely temporary, delay rather than months-long separation. I cannot bring myself to clear that third place setting, cannot accept the finality such practical adjustment would represent.
Hope requires visible symbols, tangible expressions of expectation that defy rational assessment of probability. Your empty place setting becomes my daily act of faith, my stubborn insistence that separation is temporary despite evidence suggesting otherwise. The wooden spoon your father carved for your 5th birthday still bears tiny teeth marks from your childhood habit of chewing while thinking, small indentations that transformed functional tool into personal artifact. Those tooth marks tell the story of a boy who approached eating as contemplative activity, who needed time to consider each bite, each thought, each moment of existence with the thoroughness that marked your approach to everything requiring attention. Do you still pause between bites when eating, Thomas? Does contemplation still accompany your meals? Or has city living taught you to eat with urban efficiency? I prepare portions for 3 people, though only one mouth needs feeding, unable to adjust measurements that my hands know by memory, unable to convince my heart that abundance no longer serves useful purpose. The extra food finds its way to Mrs. Davies or Brother Francis, neighbors who accept my overflow with the gentle understanding of people who recognize grief's practical expressions. They eat my surplus without comment about inefficient cooking habits, allowing me the comfort of maintaining routines that connect present action with hoped-for future circumstances.
The chair where you sat faces the window that frames our oak tree, positioning chosen to let you observe birds and squirrels during meals that often lasted longer than your appetite strictly required. You were never a quick eater, Thomas, preferring to make dining into extended social occasion when conversation could flow around shared food, when family gathered not just for nourishment, but for the communion that transforms eating from necessity into sacrament. Meals became opportunities for storytelling, for sharing daily adventures, for weaving individual experiences into family narrative. Your father's chair at table's head remains empty as well, though for longer than yours, creating a double absence that makes our small table seem vast as cathedral nave when I sit alone with only candlelight for company. I eat facing both empty chairs, conducting conversation with memory when silence grows too heavy to bear alone. These imaginary dialogues comfort and wound simultaneously, providing the illusion of companionship while emphasizing the reality of solitude that defines my current circumstances. Do you eat at a large table in Master Geoffrey's house, Thomas? Do merchant families gather for elaborate meals with multiple courses, with servants attending diners, with conversation focused on trade routes and market prices, rather than village gossip and seasonal observations? I hope you find warmth in whatever dining arrangements shape your daily nourishment. Hope you contribute your thoughtful voice to discussions that appreciate contemplative participation alongside quicker wit. The bread I break each evening tastes different when eaten alone, Thomas. Less sweet despite identical ingredients, less satisfying despite adequate quantity. Bread, like most of life's essentials, improves through sharing, reaches its fullest potential when it nourishes community rather than merely individual hunger.
When I eat your portion along with my own, abundance becomes burden rather than blessing, reminder of loss rather than celebration of plenty. I save the best portions for your place setting, Thomas, the finest slice of bread, the choicest bit of cheese, the reddest apple from our winter stores. This offering to your absent presence follows no church doctrine, serves no practical purpose, yet feels necessary as morning prayers or evening devotions. Perhaps love requires ritual expression, needs ceremony to maintain connection across distance, across time, across the impossible gaps that separate hearts despite their determination to remain joined. The conversations we would have shared during evening meals continue in my imagination, Thomas, carried on by memory's voice, speaking words you might have said, asking questions your curious mind would have formulated, sharing observations your sharp eyes would have made about daily events that seemed ordinary until viewed through your particular way of seeing. These imagined dialogues provide companionship that silence cannot offer, yet they also emphasize the inadequacy of memory compared to living presence. Your appetite was always moderate, Thomas, never greedy but thoroughly appreciative of whatever food appeared before you. You ate with gratitude that made cooking feel like blessing rather than chore, with attention that honored the work required to transform raw ingredients into prepared meals. Such appreciation from a child teaches parents about the sacred nature of daily provision, about how gratitude transforms routine tasks into expressions of love made tangible through nourishment offered and accepted. The honey jar that sweetened your morning bread sits half empty beside your place setting, its golden contents waiting for someone whose sweet tooth appreciated such luxury. You would spread honey with careful precision, Thomas, ensuring each bite received proper portion of sweetness, making small jar last longer through judicious distribution rather than wasteful abundance. Such childhood lessons about moderation serve you well now, I hope, teaching adult wisdom about enjoying good things without excessive indulgence. I wonder what foods you're learning to enjoy in York, Thomas. City delicacies unavailable in village markets, merchant luxuries that demonstrate prosperity through exotic flavors rather than simple abundance. Do you taste spices from distant lands, fruits that travel along trade routes your apprenticeship is teaching you to understand, preserves and confections that showcase wealth through their rarity rather than their nourishment? May such experiences expand your palate while preserving appreciation for simple foods prepared with love. The clay cup that holds your evening milk maintains its position at your right hand, exactly where you always placed it after drinking your fill. That cup, formed by village potter long since departed, carries the imperfections that mark handmade objects. Slight asymmetry, finger impressions visible in its walls, glaze that varies in thickness and color. Such imperfections make objects precious rather than merely functional, transform utility into art through evidence of human hands shaping clay into forms that serve both practical and aesthetic purposes. When I clear the table after solitary meals, I wash 2 plates but leave the third untouched, maintaining the illusion that someone simply left the table temporarily rather than indefinitely. This small deception allows me to end each day with hope instead of finality, with expectation rather than resignation. Perhaps self-deception sometimes serves healing purposes, provides necessary buffer between heart and reality when reality threatens to overwhelm emotional resources already strained beyond comfortable limits. When I clear the table after solitary meals, I wash 2 plates but leave the third untouched, maintaining the illusion that someone simply left the table temporarily rather than indefinitely. This small deception allows me to end each day with hope instead of finality, with expectation rather than resignation. Perhaps self-deception sometimes serves healing purposes, provides necessary buffer between heart and reality when reality threatens to overwhelm emotional resources already strained beyond comfortable limits. The wood grain of our table tells stories, Thomas. Rings that mark the tree's growth, patterns that reveal weather patterns during years when that oak lived in forest rather than cottage, characteristics that make this particular piece of furniture irreplaceable despite its simple functionality. Your father chose this wood carefully, selecting planks that would age gracefully, that would bear the marks of family use without losing beauty, that would anchor our domestic life through its solid presence beneath daily sustenance and celebration alike. These words I write to you, Thomas, must carry all the embraces I cannot give, all the conversations we cannot share, all the moments of ordinary affection the distance has stolen from a mother's daily experience. My pen grows heavy as it traces letters across parchment, weighted by the responsibility of transforming feeling into language, emotion into ink marks that must somehow bridge the impossible gap between my heart and yours. How inadequate words seem when they must substitute for presence, when they must convey warmth that only physical nearness can properly communicate. The parchment beneath my hand feels rough and impermanent, Thomas, a fragile bridge across months and miles that separate us. Yet perhaps fragility makes some things more precious rather than less valuable. Perhaps temporary beauty carries deeper meaning than permanent monuments that outlast the hearts they were meant to commemorate. This letter, written by candlelight in December's depths, holds more of my love than any grand gesture could contain, speaks more truth than eloquent speeches, reaches farther than the strongest voice could carry across winter landscape. I fold these pages with hands that tremble, not from cold, but from the magnitude of what I'm attempting, sending maternal love across impossible distances, trusting words to carry what physical presence would communicate effortlessly.
Each fold creates new creases in parchment that will bear permanent record of this moment when your mother sat alone beside dying fire, writing into darkness that feels vast as the space between earth and stars, intimate as the space between heartbeats. The wax that will seal this letter comes from bees that no longer occupy our garden, creatures whose industry provided sweetness during summers when you helped me tend their homes. That wax, formed by countless small lives working toward purposes they could not have understood, now serves to protect words born from love they could not have imagined. Strange how the simplest materials, wax, ink, parchment, flame, combine to create miracles of connection that overcome obstacles too large for any single element to defeat alone. Brother Francis has promised to send this letter with the next merchant traveling toward York, trusting to strangers' kindness what my own hands cannot deliver safely. Such faith challenges my heart, Thomas. Faith that unknown people will honor the trust we place in them. Faith that your mother's letter will reach your hands rather than disappearing into the vastness that swallows so many hopes, so many attempts at connection across distance that defeats all but the most determined love. The candle that has illuminated this writing burns low now, its flame smaller but no less bright, concentrated into final moments of service that seem more precious because they cannot last much longer. Like that flame, my writing must end soon, must release these words into uncertainty, while trusting that they carry sufficient warmths to survive whatever journey lies between their creation and your reading. Some acts of love require faith in outcomes we cannot control, confidence in purposes we cannot see.
Do you remember the lullabies I sang to ease your childhood fears, Thomas? Simple melodies that transformed darkness from threatening unknown into comfortable embrace. Words that promised safety in a world that sometimes felt too large for small boys to navigate successfully. Tonight I sing those same lullabies to empty cottage rooms, my voice carrying across spaces that separate us, but cannot diminish the power of mother's song to bless her child wherever he may be sleeping. The wind outside our cottage carries winter's bite, but also winter's promise that spring will return despite present cold, that seasons turn reliably despite appearances that suggest permanent stasis, that time moves toward renewal even when movement seems impossible to perceive. Such promise sustains hope when hope requires more strength than single hearts can provide, when waiting demands endurance that exceeds what solitary souls should be expected to bear without divine assistance. As I prepare to close this letter, Thomas, I feel your presence more strongly than at any moment since your departure for York. Not presence that deceives or comforts through false perception, but presence that transcends physical proximity, that exists in the realm where love creates its own reality, independent of earthly limitations. You are here with me as I write these final words, as real as candlelight, as warm as the fire that has blessed our evening's communion across impossible distance. The oak tree outside our window stands patient in winter wind, its empty branches reaching toward sky that holds more stars than human eyes can count, more light than human hearts can contain. That tree witnessed your growing, Thomas, sheltered your playing, provided backdrop for memories that no season can steal, no distance can diminish, no separation can destroy. When you return, not if, but when, that oak will welcome you with the same steady presence that has anchored our cottage through all the storms that have tested its endurance. Sleep peacefully wherever this letter finds you, Thomas. Know that your mother's love travels faster than any messenger, reaches farther than any road, burns brighter than any flame. Know that you carry Millbrook in your heart as surely as Millbrook holds you in its memory, that distance cannot sever connections forged by love, seasoned by time, blessed by the mysterious forces that bind hearts across any separation circumstances might impose. The parchment holds all the words my heart can release tonight, Thomas. The seal will soon protect them for whatever journey lies ahead, whatever hands will carry them toward yours, whatever circumstances will determine their safe arrival. I release these words like doves sent toward distant destinations, trusting that love provides its own navigation, its own protection, its own assurance of reaching intended hearts despite obstacles that would defeat less determined messengers. The parchment grows still beneath my hand, Thomas, as if it too recognizes that our communion draws toward its close. The words have found their places across these pages, like seeds planted in earth that will carry them toward distant harvest, like prayers whispered into darkness that trust in light they cannot see but know exists beyond vision's reach. My pen rests now beside the inkwell, its work complete, its purpose fulfilled, in the strange alchemy that transforms thought into marks, love into language, hope into something tangible enough to fold and seal and send toward tomorrow's possibilities. The candle flame dances smaller now, casting gentle shadows that seem to bow in reverence toward words written by its faithful light. How many letters has candlelight witnessed across centuries of human separation? How many hearts has flame comforted while they poured love into ink, while they trusted parchment to carry what presence could not deliver, while they transformed longing into language that might somehow bridge unbridgeable distances? This small fire connects me to countless mothers writing countless letters to countless children,
all of us united in the ancient work of maintaining connection across separation that threatens to overwhelm love with absence. The cottage settles into deeper quiet now, Thomas, walls and beams adjusting to night's temperature, floorboards releasing the day's accumulated warmth in small sounds like contented sighs. Even our humble dwelling seems to understand that sacred work has been accomplished within its shelter, that its stones and timber have housed something precious during these hours when Mother wrote to Son across winter's cold vastness. Home becomes temple when love performs its ceremonies of connection, when ordinary objects serve extraordinary purposes, when simple acts transcend their apparent limitations to touch something eternal. My hands, stained now with ink but warmed by the work of writing, fold this letter with movements grown ceremonial through repetition of love's familiar gestures. Each fold creates new intimacy between words and parchment, new protection for thoughts that must survive whatever journey awaits them, new preparation for the moment when your hands will reverse these folds and release my words into your reading like flowers opening to morning light after night's patient waiting. The wax melts under candle heat, becoming soft and receptive to impression, ready to accept the mark that will seal these words against weather and time and the rough handling that letters endure during travel along roads that know nothing of their precious cargo.
This seal will bear witness to our connection, Thomas, will speak silently of the love that created it, will guard our communion until you break its embrace and release my voice into your heart's hearing. Good night, beloved child of my heart. May your dreams carry the rustle of parchment pages, the echo of pen scratching across paper, hungry for words, the whisper of Mother's voice speaking love into the vast silence that holds us in its keeping. May morning find you rested in the knowledge that you are cherished beyond distance, beyond time, beyond any separation that circumstances might impose between hearts that chose each other before choosing was necessary, before love needed explanation or justification or any defense except its own persistent existence. And may tomorrow find you growing strong in whatever calling shapes your days, blessed with friends who recognize your worth, guided by wisdom that combines your father's steady strength with your mother's hopeful heart, protected by prayers that rise each evening from our cottage hearth like incense offered to heaven's mercy. The dawn that comes will bring us one day closer to reunion, one day nearer to the moment when letter writing gives way to conversation, when words on parchment surrender to words spoken in each other's presence, when separation's long discipline yields to love's patient victory over every obstacle that dared stand between mother and child. Good night, time traveler. May your dreams carry the gentle whisper of the scroll.